Good morning, and welcome to the Daily Huddle. My name is Tara Heaton, and I am one of the hosts for Tuesday, where we talk about everything about communication and relationships. And we do this because we believe that more effective communication builds better relationships, and better relationships make for better business, better families, better communities, and a better way to experience this one life we have to live. So today I am really excited about the topic because I'm extremely passionate about it, and it certainly aligns with our theme. And we're going to be talking about emotions, emotional intelligence, EQ. So it's called. And oftentimes, I think we understand that EQ has something to do with emotions, but what I want to talk about today is how we can take our emotional intelligence and leverage it for greater impact, whether it's at our work, with our mission, whatever we're after in life, our emotions, I assert today that our emotions are actually our superpower. And I'm going to talk about how I have learned through some tumultuous pieces of my journey to use those emotions to make a greater impact in the world. But I'm going to first take us back to ask us a couple questions. I want you to ask yourself this. Can you remember anyone ever telling you to calm down or to lower your voice? One of my favorites, stay in your lane. How about when we were younger? Go to your room until you can stop crying. Excuse me, pollen's killing me. Or the one that everybody seems to know is, if you don't stop crying, I'm going to give you something to cry about. Well, tears and crying are not our only emotion, but all of these things we've been told since we were very young. It's kind of the big overarching message is you have all these feelings and you have all these emotions, but we're told to keep them in check, to suppress them. I'll give you an example. Going back I'm going to go back. I want you to think back to your childhood, and I'm going to help us to do that by going back to mine. I grew up in a middle-class ranch-style home back in the 70s and 80s. And there were 8-foot popcorn ceiling and this rusty orange colored shag carpeting, wood paneling walls, and small windows. It was a dark home, except for the living room. The living room was carpeted in this bright Kelly green color. It was a spacious room, and there was this luxurious down sofa that seemed to glisten like Gulf Coast sand in the sun. And on one entire wall of the living room was all windows. And in front of that window was this big cabinet covered in lush green plants, just a shade or two darker than that carpeting. I was not allowed in the living room. But as some of you know, I've always been a rule breaker. And so whenever I could get away with it, I would sneak into the living room and I would open the cabinet where there was a record player, and I would turn on either Sonny and Cher or Helen Reddy singing Delta Dawn, What's That Flower You Have On? I would have my mom's round hairbrush in my hand, and I would sing to the top of my lungs and dance around to my heart's content. And when I was finished, I would plop into that luxurious sofa and look over into the adoring eyes of my imaginary boyfriend, David Cassidy. Well, as the years ticked by, I stopped going into the living room for these solo joy sessions. I think it was the world telling us to be cool, to be a little bit more apathetic, and that is not appropriate behavior. I bet a lot of you all can relate in some way of being a child and seeing like a huge field and knowing that that huge field was meant to be run through, or just wanting to skip or to throw our head back in laughter. But along the way, we're told to suppress those emotions. We're told it literally, and it's suggested to us by societal norms. As I look back over those years of going into that living room, I know what I was doing. I was setting myself free to express my emotions despite a world suggesting that I calm down. Don't you imagine that our emotions are there for a purpose? Our emotions are not within us so that we can quiet them or run from them or suppress them. They have a purpose. Interestingly, as you all know that I've done some research around this topic. And here's what research tells us about EQ. And I want to explain very simply, but I want to really clarify what is EQ. EQ is simply our ability to be aware of our own emotions. That's emotional intelligence. And research shows, and I think this is kind of interesting, that women typically have a higher EQ than men do. So I'm going to try to let somebody in here. There we go. And that does not mean, here's where I think it gets skewed. That doesn't mean that women are more emotional. I think we've been led to believe that, but that's not what it means. What it means is that women are more aware of we're typically more aware of our emotions, and we're more called to express them. So here's where the power is. I want to share something that will put some color around this. I'm going to share a screen here real quickly and show y'all a couple of things. Make this baby big. Okay, so if you can see this without my face in the way, these are typically the emotions that men are in touch with. Now, again, not all, but according to research. And I look at these emotions. If you can't see them from where you're listening, it's sad, engaged, happy, angry, and fearful. Those are the emotions. Now, I would say my husband probably would tap into 2 or 3 of those at most, and then he's disinterested. But what about women? These are the emotions that women tend to experience. There are so many different layers of being sad or engaged or angry. We can feel withdrawn, lonely, offended, playful, amazed, accepted, hyper, thrilled. The list goes on and on. We all have the ability to feel all these levels of emotions. But as women, oftentimes, not only do we clarify the emotion, but we also can assess the intensity of those emotions. It's not that women have more of a capacity to do this. That's not the case. It is that we have more of a tendency to do this, and there's a difference. So think about that for just a moment. It's not that we're more able, it's that we have more tendency to do it. And part of this is because societal norms are telling us something. Societal norms are telling us that emotions are a sign of weakness. Now, fortunately, because of thought leaders today like Simon Sinek and Brené Brown, they are telling us that emotions actually are our strength, and our ability to really tap into our emotions, understand them, is really a power. I'll tell you what I believe. I believe that the pollen is getting to me, but I also believe that each of us is born with a flame inside of us. And that flame is inside of us to remind us to never, ever let anyone break our spirit. I think if we think back to when we were a child, we will know that there's something inside of us. And do you know what fuels that flame? Our emotions. That's what fuels the flame inside of us. I'm going to stop sharing the screen. So we have this tendency to run from, to suppress, or to hide our emotions, but they are actually what fuels our passion. And that's the process that I want to talk about a little bit today. I think that not only societal norms, but also the demands and the stress of life and the heartache that we all will inevitably face, all of those are throwing sand on that flame, that yearning, that wanting to express our emotions. Some more interesting research, y'all. There's a lot of conversation around unmet childhood needs. It's always been a topic in the world of psychology for years and years. And today we're trying to blame preservatives, so lack of good nutrition, and technology on children growing up to be thriving adults, their inability to do that. But what research shows us is that we're not meeting the same childhood need for really thousands of years, and it is this simple. We are failing to provide and create emotional intimacy for our children. And if we fail to allow that in our homes when our children are young, and let them see that their emotions are something to be celebrated, to be understood, and to be able to use it for impact, then we're suppressing something that really, truly, at the end of the day, is our superpower. Our emotions are at the essence of the human experience. But here's what we go after. We go after peace. And peace means not showing our full emotions. We want to keep the peace, right? We don't want to upset the apple cart. So we pull back. We over time, many of us take shame in the fact that we have beautiful emotions yearning to be let out. Now, when we're children, we let those emotions out and we can set them free. We fall to the floor, we beat our fists, we cry, and then we recover and we become a little bit stronger for it. But as we get older, we stop letting these emotions out. Well, what we have on our side is maturity, so that when we mature, we can actually use those emotions for good. And that's what I really want to dig into today. How exactly can we do this? I learned along the way that there's a process to this. And I learned it because I, for many, many years, did exactly what I'm talking about. So let's take how we're not allowing our emotions to leverage impact in the world, and let's see how we can change that. For years, I was a classic example of running from my emotions. And I'll tell you how I did it and why it's easier to do today than ever before. I used micro pleasure stacking and macro pleasure stacking to try to beat away my grief. So macro pleasure stacking, that's our obsession with a goal. And I was completely obsessed for many, many years with the only thing I could think about was stopping my daughters from having seizures, stopping her seizures. That's called macro pleasure stacking. It's when we become so focused on a goal that we are causing damage to the other things that we value in life. And that is exactly what I was doing. I was afraid to slow down and experience my emotions and feel that grief and put it to use for good in the world. For years, I did this. I was neglecting my other children. I was neglecting my marriage. I was neglecting my health. That was that obsession with a goal. And that shows up in people's lives. We become so obsessed with maybe success or a promotion or buying that new house that we are forgetting to experience the life that is within our grasp. But I was also doing something that I think we can all relate to, and you all have heard me talk about this before, micro pleasure stacking. Micro pleasure stacking is our easy access to little hedonistic hits of pleasure today. We have more access to what is a growing addiction to dopamine more than ever before today. Let's think about that for a minute. We used to have to make some effort to have a snack. Now all we have to do is open a shiny bag. Access to alcohol, caffeine, sugar, much more accessible today. Nicotine, not as much as it used to be, but that is one of the many stimulants that helps us to run from our emotions. Also exercise. Some people become obsessed with exercise just so that they don't have to face their emotions. So I want us to take just a moment here and see if you can assess your behavior and what you may be doing in your life to avoid your emotions. What is heartbreaking about this story is not only was I running from my emotions, determined not to be soft, but I was modeling this to my children. And my children learned not to slow down, not to let our emotions out. I, all those years ago, thought it was a sign of strength that I could stay tough and keep my tears intact. Today, I see that it was a weakness. I was not strong enough to feel those emotions. And the only way to let them flow through us and be repurposed into something more important in this world is to feel them. So that's the very first step in using our emotional intelligence to make a greater impact in the world. So let's talk about it in practical terms for a moment. If we are feeling sad or upset, we need to go deeper and figure out where that's coming from. I call this this is step number one, this is truth. So not only do we have these emotions, but we need to identify them and ask ourselves where they're really coming from. If we don't do this, here's an easy example of how it will show up at work, okay? Let's say, for example, sorry, y'all, the pollen's killing me. Here's an easy example. Let's say you're at work and your calendar is so filled up with meetings that you can't do the work you were hired to do. Maybe software development. So you need to be innovative. You need to get into that flow state to really develop what you're working on. But you're having to go to so many meetings that your flow state is constantly interrupted. So you become frustrated, you become resentful, you become stressed, and you take all those emotions and you finally explode on your supervisor and you say, my home life is stressful. I can't focus at work. I am not doing well. I've sacrificed my health. I need help. Okay, that is an example of an immature way or a less evolved way to use our emotions. So let's start again with step one, truthful. Yes, we feel frustrated. Yes, we feel stressed out. Yes, we feel resentful. But if we express those only because of how they affect us, we're not using it for greater impact. So we could take those same emotions, same scenario, and go to our supervisor and sit down and express what we're experiencing and how it's affected our ability to deliver on the KPIs, deliver on the mission. And what I always encourage my clients to do, which completely changes the conversation, is rather than taking those emotions and communicating them in such a way that says what you can't do, flip it upside down and share it in such a way that it's positive. So rather than saying, this is preventing me from accomplishing this, still better for the company, but I would like for us to imagine for a moment if we could free up 6 to 8 hours of meetings on my calendar each week, here's what I would be able to do to contribute to our mission and to our KPIs. Imagine. So you imagine those emotions being gone. That's how we can take our emotions and use them for good. Now, this is just an example. This is just a work example. We can take this into our personal relationships. Rather than coming at our partner and saying that we blame them for how their behavior is affecting us, share what we want to do to contribute to that relationship in a positive way. So you may say to your partner, if you're able to put your iPad away in the evenings, I imagine what this 1 hour of intimate time every evening after dinner might do for our connection, might do for our joy, for our energy, whatever it is that you all are aligned on, whatever your values are. So think about whomever you're communicating with, whether it's a work person, a partner, a friend, community, a nonprofit. Think about this, and this will really help this process. Think about what values you have that you're aligned with. Take your emotions that you've been very truthful with personally and communicate them in such a way that you're able to paint a picture of how you're able to contribute to that mission, to those shared values. That is using our emotional intelligence to make a greater impact in this world. So here's the process, okay? First thing first, if you're feeling negative emotions or positive, we can use this for positive. That's a conversation for another day. I think it's the negative ones that we try to suppress, whether we're feeling grief or heartache or anger, whatever those emotions are. Sit in those emotions, accept them. Do not shame yourself and tell yourself that, oh, it could be worse. I shouldn't be feeling this way. Life could be so much worse. Your emotions are there because they have a purpose. We are made to be emotional beings. And more than any other creature on earth, we have the ability to communicate these emotions. They are there for a reason. So first ask yourself how these emotions can help to contribute to your goals and your dreams. And then the bigger thing is, how can these emotions contribute to a greater impact on earth? So whatever your purpose is, your mission, your joy, whether it's personal, whether it's work, this is a powerful formula. So I want to encourage us to stop trying to suppress or hide our emotions. I want us to sit right in them, be truthful with our emotions, ask ourselves exactly what we're feeling and how we might communicate them as mature adults to leave a greater impact in the world. I'm going to close this out with this and then see if we have any comments. We are not born to control our emotions. Absolutely not. Those emotions are there telling us to throw our head back in laughter, to let our tears fall down, to express whatever it is, whether it's joy, whether it's fear, whether it's resentment, whatever they are, they need to be expressed. But we have a world telling us that fear and expectations and societal norms, all those things are throwing sand on that flame that we are all born with. And I am here to assert that the way to fuel that flame is with our emotions. We should be able to use our emotions to fuel our spirit and make a greater impact in this world. So if y'all have any thoughts, comments, questions about my topic, I would love to hear it. How did that land on you? Monica Agando is so good at this. She's like, so what do y'all think? And then she'll just sit in silence till somebody has something to say. Let me see. Who can I call on? There's got to be somebody that has a thought about this.
Good
Fareed.
morning, Tara.
Good
Hello.
morning.
Thank you so much for an insightful topic. And you know, you are so right that, and you're so right that with emotions, we tend to suppress our emotions because we think that we are an adult and we are not supposed to show our emotions. And you know, and because of this, I think this is the reason why we become so sad and so depressed. And then we allow what has happened in the past to dictate our future. And that's not right. We need to let everything out.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. I mean, you really summarized what I was attempting to say. What is concerning to me is it's easier today than ever before to never have to face our emotions. You know, it used to be if you were standing in line or you were making a meal, you had to wait for the food to bake, or you have to wait till it's your turn in line, and it would just stand there and be alone with your thoughts. And today we have so much access to entertainment and stimulation and snacks, and particularly our smartphone, you know where I'm going with this, that we don't have to face our emotions. And when we don't face our emotions, it becomes more and more difficult to manage them. They're there. We're not wiping them away. So thank you. Thank you so much for that reminder. I think oftentimes we do allow fear to prevent us from expressing our emotions because we want to keep the peace. Or as I mentioned, we shame ourselves for having these emotions. When I was going through some really difficult times, I had so many times people would say, oh, what I'm facing, it has nothing in comparison to what you've been through. They're still your emotions and they still have purpose and they still have meaning. So thank you.
Tara, let me ask you this. You know that females are quicker to express their emotions than males, right? Is it because of how our brain works?
Love this question. That is part of it, yes. And part of it is conditioning, societal norms. So partly it's nature and partly it's nurture, and I'll explain the difference. Here's the part that sets the man brain and the woman brain apart as it relates to emotions. You may have heard me talk about something called oxytocin, and that is that feeling of trust and bonding and love and connection. We all have the ability to make this hormone. For women, it's more of a feeling of safety. Men actually produce a lot more of something called vasopressin, which is the sister or the brother to oxytocin. It also is a feeling of love and bonding. But do you know what it comes with? It comes with this fierce yearning to protect. So it has a lot of that higher vibration of energy in it. Again, so that's the nurture part. That's the part that most men are born with more capacity to build vasopressin. That's one thing. And then you probably know this, but it's cool to remember is women have more estrogen and men have more testosterone. And testosterone can contribute to feelings of that higher vibration, that more tough, that more fight. and men are born to be the protector. That's more of the nature piece of it. Whereas women have more estrogen, which definitely calls us to express our emotions. So again, we're born that way. I've done some, interesting research around this as it relates to people that are born, let's say you're born as a male, but as you grow up, you realize that you're homosexual. And what the latest research is showing in this is that, and this is, personal to me because my first husband is a gay man, and he fought it all these years. And it is absolute science that when the baby is in utero, there's a particular time where the mother is during her pregnancy, where, for example, my ex-husband was flooded with estrogen more than the average baby. So if that happens to a man, and then that woman has another male baby, there's a high likelihood that like brothers would both be gay. But if she had a girl and she still has that tendency to have a high flood of estrogen, there's almost no likelihood that that little girl would be born to be gay. So I know I'm getting way off topic, but there's a lot of nurture in our yearning to express our emotions. Again, men have just as many, they have them, but because of testosterone, vasopressin, and what happened to them in utero is part of it too. It doesn't feel as natural for them to dig deep and express those emotions. Fascinating stuff, right?
Oh yeah, it is.
Thank you for asking me about the brain, because as you can tell, like I love talking about it, but not everybody does. But it's fascinating. And then I think to know that also gives us some peace. This is the way we were beautifully, perfectly created to be. Yeah.
Because the other thing is that not everyone is emotionally intelligent.
No, I couldn't agree more. And I think a lot of that is conditioning, don't you?
Yeah.
More due to nurture, our life experiences. Yeah. Thank you for that. Thank you all so much. Thank you for being here and listening to this conversation around emotions. Just a reminder before I sign off, because I always want to give something that feels actionable. Next time you feel yourself filled up with stress or anger or hurt, whatever the case may be, take a breath, sit in those emotions, be very truthful with yourself about why you have them. And then rather than thinking, okay, I'm going to have the guts just to spew them out without any strategy around it or any purpose, ask yourself how you can use those emotions to reach a goal of yours, or even better than that, reach a greater purpose that aligns you and connects you with other people in your life. Our emotions are there to fuel our spirit so that we might have a greater impact on this earth. And let's talk about some of those emotions as I close us out. Love. Love is always within us. It is I think, the core, at the core of the heart and the soul that fuels that flame. So remember to tap into your love and express it. And remember to remain generous. That does not mean necessarily to open your wallet. It means give of your time, of your heart, of your vulnerability. Just remember to give. And remember not to take it all too seriously. Take time to laugh, throw that head back, and let those endorphins fuel your body. Take care of your stress. How do you do that? By eating mostly plants, drinking more water, getting your sleep, and getting up and moving that body. Thank you all so much for being here on the Daily Huddle, and I can't wait to see you tomorrow at 9 a.m. Eastern.